Hi, Misha here, and today let's talk about a 75-year-old mystery, the so-called Wandering Zero for the number 5 Mark I Enfield, often referred to as the Jungle Carbine, but the British just called it Rifle number 5. So yeah, in this video, thought we would talk a little bit more about this really cool and interesting variant and compare an early production and a late production example and look at a few changes that were made and how they actually did directly relate to the whole Wandering Zero thing. Also, I brought out one of the Wilkinson blade bayonets that went wrong with it. And it's actually quite interesting. This started off as a lightened number 4 pattern and was the first Enfield carbine in about 40 years. So with that, let's go back and look where it started, and then we'll kind of get into what really distinguishes a number 5. So if you're looking at one, maybe you can spot the fakes, because there are some out there thanks to Navy Arms and Golden State. And look at some unique features, and talk about military service and why production was so brief. Going way back to the 19th century, when the Lee Metford and later Lee Enfield were adopted, they had, of course, a long infantry rifle and a short cavalry carbine. The long rifle had a 30-some-odd inch barrel, and the carbine had a barrel under 20 inches. This was standard for the day and time. But after the experiences in the Boer War, they realized that, having one gun that's a little too long and another gun that's maybe a little too short and light wasn't the way to go, and that led to the adoption of the short magazine Lee Enfield in the early 20th century, starting off as the Mark I and being refined into the Mark III of World War I fame. Well, of course, the Mark III would be turned into the number 4 in the 1930s, really tested in 1939, and then adopted in 1941. With the SMLE, the Mark III, they tried to have a short rifle, where it was right in the middle between infantry rifle and cavalry carbine, and they succeeded. With the number 4, though, because they tried to improve accuracy, speed up manufacturing, it ended up being a little bit longer and quite a bit heavier. And this worked well for a time, but by 1942, they were considering doing what they called a number 4 lightened rifle. And the concept of going back to a carbine would appear. Throughout 1943, the Infantry Weapons Development Committee looked at several design proposals, tried several things, and by 1944 they kind of hit upon what they wanted to do. And in March 21 to be exact, of 1944, they selected the pattern that we know and love today, with all of its changes and whatnot. They would gear up to produce these. They would set up production at BSA Shirley's facility, and also Fazakerley, the Royal Ordnance Factory there. And on September 12, it would officially be adopted as the Rifle number 5 Mark I, and it would be in production that month. So those first months would be March 9 of 44, and this one's actually a 10 of 44. So quite an early jobber, I would say. And it was about the same length as the old cavalry carbine, maybe a little bit longer, but not by much. It was a little bit heavier, but still a very lightened form. And they really did. They did everything they could to shave off every fraction of an ounce. So with that, let's put our old warhorse back in the stables and see what they did to turn the number 4 into the number 5. First off, the number 5 is about 4.5 inches shorter than the number 4. The number 4 is about 44 inches. The number 5 is about 39.5 inches. The carbine here, even though it was just called a rifle, has about a 20.5 inch barrel, including this flash hider, which is actually, if not directly taken from the Bren light machine gun, certainly inspired by it. If you were to take it off, it's about an 18 3/4 inch barrel. We have a new bayonet lug versus the one on the number 4 here, where it's socket types. We'll look at bayonets in just a minute. As you can tell, this has a full-length handguard. This is severely cut back on the top and even on the bottom. The barrel itself is actually a thinner profile. Not by a huge amount, but some. And they did what they called Knox form lightning cuts, or scallops. They would take metal off the rear of the barrel here under the handguard versus this gun. They would also lightning cut the receiver under the wood line mostly. They would even go to a thin pattern trigger guard on the number 4. Notice how there's no real step here. And on the number 5, there's a little step. Now, to be fair, quite a few number 4s ended up with this as well. But it was standard on the number 5. Moving back, we have a similar buttstock shape, but whereas the Enfield number 4 has a standard metal butt plate with trapdoor, the 5 has a metal lined butt plate with small rubber recoil pad on it. That pad wasn't so much installed for recoil reduction. These days they're very hard rubber, but even back in the 1940s when they made these, they was still a pretty hard rubber. They went for more durability. Now this was more of an anti-slip pad than anything else, so it could mount against the shoulder, wouldn't ride up. So they definitely did quite a few changes, and they really did save weight anywhere they could. With the number 4 bolt handle, it's just solid here. There are variations, of course. With the number 5, though, they very much put a lightning cut there. Actually, it's one of the major places they probably were able to take off weight from the action. Also, this sling swivel arrangement in the back would help them quite a bit. The swivel on the bottom is gone. Now it's just a small wire bar on the back of the butt plate. And the stock itself is inlet for the sling, again saving a little bit of weight for wood there. These are typically birch wood stocks. They even put a scallop or lightning cut on the back of the front sight base here. And this whole thing is just a unit. Bayonet lug, front sight, flash hider, all combined together, again to save weight. Now your standard number 4 has a rear sight that goes out to 1,200 yards. a jungle carbine, as these would soon become known as. Rear sight is shorter, because again, shorter barrel, out to 800. So that's another good way to tell apart. And they use the standard Enfield 10-round magazine, standard Lee action, firing the standard 303 cartridge. They would typically be issued with the Mark 7, which was a 174 grain bullet, bimetal core, but they could fire the older Mark 6, and they could fire the Mark 8 machine gun round, but it would put noticeable wear on the bore on the rifling. So they were discouraged from doing that, except in emergencies. And it was issued with the standard sling. Another area they saved weight was with the bayonets themselves. Here is the standard socket bayonet for the number 4. This is the pig sticker type. There's also a blade type. They went with this because it was cheap to produce, but also lightweight and compact. It's kind of making up for the slightly longer length and heavier weight of the number 4, because it's all adding to the infantryman's kit. So it did a good job of that, but it was also not really useful for much more than being a bayonet or maybe staking a tent into the ground. For the number 5, they went to the Wilkinson number 5 bayonet, a blade type here. Taking the unique bayonet lug, here's its scabbard. Quite interestingly, the scabbard has a little retention spring in there. Keeps it in very securely. Now you would think this is heavier than the number 4 bayonet, so it would add more to the kit, and you would be right. However, with this, an infantryman had to carry a second item, a combat knife, a utility knife. With the number 5, it was expected he would carry this, use it as a combat utility knife, as well as a bayonet. So overall, it was less weight. One of these was less than this plus a knife. The number 4 up here was 9 and some odd pounds unloaded with no sling, upwards of 10 pounds with a 10-round magazine and sling and all that. The number 5 was a little over 7 pounds unloaded, no sling, and just 8 pounds fully loaded with the sling on it. Either way, about 2 pounds lighter, and again, about 4.5 inches shorter. And they recognized that, this would have reduced range, but they realized by now combat was just not taking place at long ranges. So it seemed reasonable. And here they are with bayonets fixed, just to show you. But with that, let's take our number 4 away. I think she served her purpose today. And get into the combat history, the variants, and talk about how the Wandering Zero issue really ended this rifle carbine's career, just as it was really getting started. So yeah, let's get into that. So like I said, this one here is a 1044 date, so October 1944, and our other jungle is a 747 date, meaning July of 1947. And that's not too far apart, but they're actually very much early and late production. Both of these are from Fazakerley, by the way. Like I said, BSA would also produce some at Shirley. So really, it did not take long to put the number 5 into production because it was just a modified number 4. In fact, the airborne units and other special units were already getting these by late summer 1944. And it would have its limited combat debut in September during Operation Market Garden into the Netherlands. And they would start to deliver them, and they really mostly were carried by the 1st Airborne Unit. Again, lightweight, short size. And in 1945, they saw more use as British and Allied troops marched towards Berlin. They were there for the liberation of Denmark, and they would have been used for the liberation of Norway if things had gone south, but luckily there was more of a peacekeeping operation by the time they got there. So use in Europe was pretty limited, and really was with the paratroopers and others, which makes sense. It actually served alongside the early Sterling, or the Patchett, submachine gun as well there. As for Southeast Asia, it had more of an impact. It was late 1944 when the first ones made it over there, and their major combat debut was in April when British forces were fighting the Japanese in Burma. And this is the first time this might have been referred to as a jungle rifle or jungle carbine informally. And they were re-equipping their troops with these, anticipating taking back the Singapore and the Japanese fronts, but of course Japan surrendered, so that never happened. Nevertheless, British occupation forces in Japan and Java and elsewhere would have these. And it was well liked for its lightweight, compact size. It did well in the tropical environments, frankly, for being a bolt action at least. But probably the biggest, the time it really gained notoriety was during the Malayan Emergency, beginning in 1948 and really lasting through 1957. These started off in limited use there, but by the early and mid-50s, after the Korean War sparked off, more and more number 5s were sent over, and they became quite a common sight alongside the M1 Carbine and various submachine guns. They were also used in 1952 during the Mau Mau, got distracted by Hobo the cat. Hello, cat. Uprising in what we know today is, hey, you get the raw footage here, Kenya. So they saw some use in Africa. And of course they were carried during the Korean War in limited numbers. The number 4 was the main one, but some number 5s were in Korea. And not just in the hands of the British, Canadians and Australians also had some. The Canadians didn't like the number 5. The Australians, on the other hand, seemed to not have an issue with it. And so this would still be in use after Korea, but of course it would be replaced soon by the L1A1, chambered for 7.62 NATO. And it even wasn't the final Enfield variant to go into British service. That would be the number 4 Mark II. And there would be dribs and drabs of these around the dissolving empire in Africa and even the Middle East. Some turned up in Yemen in the 60s. So they hung around. But that said, yeah, production began in late summer of 1944 and was actually ordered to cease in July of 1947, and the last rifles came out of Fazakerley at the end of that year. And it wasn't just because it was a limited production thing. They originally anticipated this might be the next standard issue gun, much like how Russia adopted the M44 Mosin carbine to replace the 9130 rifle. Britain thought about making the number 5 the standard gun, but instead, like I said, they used the number 4 Mark II, 1949, until going to the L1A1. So what's the problem with this gun? Well, there were a few. Whereas troops complained about the original LEC carbine in the late 19th century for having not enough range accuracy, that wasn't really a concern of the number 5. However, they did share the same complaint of too much flash and felt recoil. The flash shutter didn't dampen it all the way, although it did help. But this butt plate didn't really help. It might have even made it worse. Hard to say. But of course, when you're operating an 8-pound or less gun, firing a full power rifle cartridge, yeah, it's going to kick you a bit. And since it's not even a self-loading gun, there's nothing to absorb the recoil. That was another thing too. It was a bolt-action gun, an Enfield, a gun that dated back to the 1880s. Troops weren't super satisfied with being handed these all the time. It was good for patrols in the jungles, but yes, hobo again. Yes, hobo. Yeah, it had issues. But of course, the main one is Wandering Zero. This was an issue that cropped up almost right away. Soldiers, armorers would claim to have a gun zeroed in. The front sight is windage adjustable. The rear is elevation. They would get it sighted in, and they claimed after some time and some use, it would lose zero. Now, the jury's out on how real or not this is. Some say it was made up. Some say it was endemic, a complete design flaw. Many, like myself, are kind of in the middle. Some rifles probably suffered from it. Others did not. But it was something noted. And they did try to address it, try to figure out what caused it, and fix it. And that actually leads us to a couple of production changes we can look at that these two rifles exemplify. One considered cause was the wood stock. They thought that this birch wood was maybe swelling up front and impacting the barrel and changing the point of aim. So, beginning in 1946, they added this metal nose cap to kind of stabilize the end of the stock and the way it contacted the barrel to make it more consistent. And so if you want to tell at a glance an early versus a late jungle, assuming the stock's original, the metal end cap is a good way to do it. Another one. This front sight, like I said, is all one piece, and it includes this flash hider. Some, I think it was over in Australia, did some testing. They pulled off the flash hider and tried to install just a normal front sight, and they claimed that the Wandering Zero issue went away. So originally, these were pressed onto the barrel, and then these two pins attached it. Well, later production ones like this, they went away from pinning, and they just went to a pressure, kind of a press fit attachment method. Neither of these changes seem to have completely addressed the issue, and some claim that they couldn't because the problem was more to do with the design. They blamed the Knox form lightning cuts in the receiver and or in the barrel, saying that they just removed material, adding to flex, all that stuff. Similarly, they claim that the lightweight barrel was just flawed. Too light, it had too much flex, too much torque on it when it would heat up. Not much you could do about that. Now, again, in testing, they did pull the receiver off and rebuild these on standard number 4 receivers, and some claimed that that fixed the issue, but again, limited numbers of gun, limited testing. It seemed to have at least been an issue serious enough that they tried this And in the end, that's why they just ordered cessation of production in the summer of 1947. They actually were working on a version called the number 5 Mark II. Much like the number 4 Mark II, it would have had a trigger hung from the receiver, not the trigger guard. And they thought about reinforcing it to launch rifle grenades, which is the most insane thing I've ever heard. This gun is rough enough with regular cartridges. Rifle grenades would be terrifying. Nothing to really do with Wandering Zero, but another production difference. This one you can tell started off, they took a standard flat-bottomed number 4 bolt handle and they lightning cut it quite big. With the later one, even the number 4s are starting to get the holes drilled in them later on, so they just shared the same bolt. So the cutout is a little bit smaller, so ever so slightly heavier. Not by much, but a little bit. Another thing too, probably really can't show you on camera, but the lengths of the buttstocks are different. They produced 3 different lengths, small, medium, and long, to try to fit this to a soldier. And this is something Britain would continue with the L1A1 as well. So there are some interesting variation in production changes. BSA at Shirley, Birmingham, would produce a little over 81,000. But major production was at Fazakerley in Liverpool, and they would build just under 170,000. So total, somewhere between 250 and 251,000 guns. Yeah, not bad for a 3-year production run, frankly. So Wandering Zero, we really don't know. Several things were considered. A couple of them they tried to address. Other ones just seemed to be part of the design. It was just kind of ruled as flawed and abandoned. Although, of course, they had them. They still used them. But in the end, they wanted to go to a new, fancy, self-loading or select fire gun. I guess the one last question. Where did the name Jungle Carbine really come from? And why is it so synonymous with it in America today? Anecdotally, this is connected to the jungle for its use first in Burma and then soon Malaysia. Yeah, could be. But what's for sure, in the 1950s, when Britain was getting rid of these, many were brought over and sold, and it was Santa Fe Arms that advertised these as British Jungle Carbines. So that's for sure where the name came from, and it stuck. And it's an apt thing. I mean, I would classify this as a carbine. Rifle isn't really correct. And not just the originals, but several companies like Golden State, Navy Arms, they would take number 4s and Mark IIIs, and they would convert them to greater or lesser extent into these guns. So if you're looking for one, if you know what you're looking for, they're really quite easy to tell apart. But if you don't, things can go meh. For one, the buttstock, the way the sling cutout is, not having the sling swivel on the bottom. The 800 meter versus, or 800 yards, I suppose it still would be at this time, versus 1200 rear sight would be another. And a real dead giveaway is the lightning cuts, the scallops under the handguard, which are on top of the chamber area. Even the best cloners usually don't do that. And like I said too, the barrel profile is ever so slightly thinner, but that's probably not something you're going to notice unless you have something to compare to. So there are guns that are fake, and these weren't even sold as real jungle carbines, but second and third hand, they might be passed off as such. And then after the end of the Cold War period and kind of the flow in of military surplus in the 90s and early 2000s, Century Arms brought in quite a few that had been left behind in Malaysia. And these are the ones that are going to be a little on the rusty side just because of the environment they were kept in. But it was still neat to see them at the time. A fresh batch coming in, but they do tend to be in a little rougher condition, especially under the wood line, and their rubber butt plates are usually toast. But that's about it. It's kind of the last major distinctive variant, the first and last carbine in the Enfield family in quite some time. And I wanted to point out a few production changes and variations in it that aren't widely talked about. These are quite fun to shoot. They do have a good amount of oomph to them, but they have the nice slick Enfield bolt action, detachable 10-round mag, all that good stuff. And they do have some stout recoil, so if you fire one, grab onto it well with both hands. But a very neat part of World War II and Korean War history. They even considered making these in Canada, but then World War II ended, so that was canceled. Australia never produced a number 5, but they did make a small number of number 6s, which was their own carbine version, but based on the Mark III. India never built these, but they did refurbish some. So you'll see some number 5s that are clearly refurbished by Ishapur. So, yeah, they got around a little bit. And I just felt like talking about it tonight with two good examples of early and late to show you. So let me know what you think, and I'd love to hear about your jungle carbines in the comments below. As always, if you could, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. I was showing you here, it has a little spring-loaded thing. And I'll catch you very soon next time.